how many people would even read a 2,000 word article summarizing that research paper? Very few.
Fast forward a year or 2 or 3 years when they've gotten incredibly sophisticated.
So I keep coming back to, it's different, but is it any worse than humans? Because humans are pretty terrible people sometimes. There's no original research, no original reporting. It's just rewriting or restating. Morning, Peter.
Hey, good morning, David. How are you?
I'm good, and good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Call Me Data. So, Peter, let's get this out of the way first. You're coming to us from the high elevations of the American West, I think, right?
Yeah, I am nestled in Park City, Utah, at a nice high elevation, and the temperature outside right now is decidedly feels like 45 degrees, which I'm not complaining about.
Wow.
But I will.
Wow.
It's funny. Yeah, it's called. One thing I feel like I'm whining a bit about it, but the altitude is definitely affecting my. It's affecting me more than I thought it would.
All right. So I guess, was that your pre-disclosure? Anything that you say that doesn't make sense, we will blame on the altitude.
That is my pre-disclosure this morning. Yes. So if I say anything really
I'm a little
stupid, it's
jealous.
not me talking.
I don't have any excuses. Like if I say something stupid, it's just me. So I can't blame anything.
Hey, but I didn't comment on the shirt. So again, I can't compete. I can't compete.
I can't even compete. So, hey, you brought to my attention what turned out to be a fascinating article that, or I should say a research paper that Microsoft released last week.
Yes.
And I think it's fascinating, both the content of the paper is fascinating, but what was also fascinating was how much press it generated. And as I think we'll talk
Right.
about, how maybe misleading some of the press coverage of the article was. So how's that for a teaser? You wanna introduce what the paper was?
No, I think that's an awesome way of teeing it off. And so yeah, Microsoft released. They had done this study. It was part of Microsoft research. And actually, if you look for the paper, it's not easy to find. It was actually quite buried. It took me a little while to actually find the underlying paper because in reading the news, you would think the sky is falling. There's these top 40 jobs that are going to be eliminated by artificial intelligence, and I think it was kind of heavy on the gloom and doom side. So I decided, let me pull up the paper and actually take a review of it and look at it. And reading a paper that's dense in mathematics at 5 o'clock in the morning is usually not a good idea. Uh, I think, especially when you're sitting at 8,000 feet altitude and you're not used to it. What I rapidly ascertained, though, is clearly what was in the news was, shall we say, not terribly accurate.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
is a good way of looking at it.
Let's back up if you haven't seen it or heard about it. The actual title of the paper that Microsoft released was called Working with AI, Measuring the Occupational Implications of Generative AI. And
Yes.
we'll put a link in our show notes, but if you're looking for it on archive.org, it's number 2507.07935.
Yes.
And it was about, in theory, it was about the implications of generative AI on jobs, but the headlines painted a very different picture than the reality. So let's talk first about what the headlines said.
Oh, actually, yeah, I wanted to pull up a headline. I meant to bring it up before we even started talking, but the headlines were heavy on the gloom and doom side. And I even kind of looked at
Yeah,
some of the articles, and they were very heavy on the gloom and doom side,
right,
which
right.
was, reading the paper, not my take at all.
It was interesting because a lot of the headlines said, Microsoft identifies jobs that are going to be displaced or disrupted by AI, and others went right into, if you have one of these jobs, you should be afraid, or that, that sort of narrative. So definitely, I mean, look, I guess that sells papers, or whatever the digital equivalent of selling papers is these days. It drives clicks and traffic, but as you said, it wasn't really an accurate representation of what the paper and the researchers found. So let's back up and start, like, what were they trying to do? Like, separate from their conclusion, what was their premise?
So they analyzed 200,000 conversations from Microsoft Copilot. These are fully anonymized conversations that they had. They're actually in the public domain. You can analyze them yourself to see how individuals were actually working with artificial intelligence. And they analyzed all these conversations, and they kind of got a sense of how they were using artificial intelligence. In many cases, they're just using it to derive information or teach or things like that, is actually how they were using it. So making that, I would say, quantum leap to these jobs are going to be destroyed by AI, to me was kind of fascinating. How you got there, I'm not really quite sure. Because
So
they
so
went
they
through
went
some,
they went through 200,000 conversations that and we'll say they did anonymize them and
Right.
do other things to depersonalize the conversation. They went through these 200,000. They were looking for, I think, what kinds of help or what kinds of tasks people were asking for. And then they
Yes.
also looked at what kind of activities the AI system performed. And, I think that there's a big caveat here, which is this was done entirely on Microsoft Bing Copilot. So this was not counting what people who were using it through a commercial license of Microsoft 365 Copilot did, I don't think. And it certainly wasn't looking at how
Right.
people used other similar large language models, ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or others. So, I think there's a little bit of a caveat there that, like, let's go with the assumption for the purposes of our discussion that the patterns of how people used it were roughly equivalent to what you'd see in other tools. We don't know for sure,
We
but
don't know for sure, right?
okay.
Exactly. And that was a big
Okay.
assumption that was made as part of the study.
And I like that what they did, which was kind of interesting. And they said in the beginning, their goal was not to predict who was going to lose their job, right? Their goal was simply to create a foundational early quantitative study on how generative AI is used in jobs, right? So they weren't even talking about disrupting. They were just talking about how useful is generative AI in different jobs. And so at the
Right.
end of it, when they looked at what these people did for a living, what their jobs were, how they used AI, how AI responded, etc., they kind of came back and created this notion of an AI applicability score, that it was scoring different jobs on how applicable AI is.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
and
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
what do you think? It's kind of funny. Applicability is a far more benign sounding term than disruption or job losses or anything else, right?
No, absolutely. It's far more benign. And they made, as I said, they made a big quantum leap. And I think one thing to note, and it's important to say this up front, they made no predictions about the future. They weren't making predictions. They were just trying to understand how individuals using Microsoft Copilot are actually using it within a work environment. Now, granted, there's going to be a big gulf. We don't really understand how AI is going to really be used in the workplace yet. So this is a beginning study. They're trying to get a sense of, okay, it's fine. We got all this information. How are people actually using our tools? I think totally legitimate way of looking at this information, but it is not elite to, if you read the study, if your job is on this list, your career is over. That's definitely not the case, I think, in many cases.
No, yeah. If you've read the headlines and this article scared you, trust me, it's nowhere near predicting that your job is going to go away or
Right.
be diminished in any way. Also, I think what's interesting, as you just said, Peter, like we can't predict the future. This is changing too rapidly, and in fact, the data set that they were working with was from late 2024, I think, if I read that correctly.
I think you're right,
So
actually, yes.
yeah. So look at how many new capabilities exist now, 6 months later than in late 2024, 7 months, whatever it is. Um, like, you know, it's just, it's evolving too quickly for this to be taken as anything other than a good data point to start looking at how AI can impact things, right? It's
No,
not a
100%.
conclusion.
No, and I think, the one thing that it certainly doesn't capture, if you look at the high value types of jobs out there, so let's go doctors, lawyers, things that you and I have spoken about quite extensively. In all fairness, they're not going to be ones that are going to be using Microsoft Copilot or any other ones. They are going to be using highly customized domain-specific models, so they're not going to be captured in any of these studies. And that's
Right.
a
That
big, big, big gap. And one more thing I want to, what struck me immediately, because you and I have spoken about it a million times, is what really wasn't captured in the top 40, and it was a subset, web developers, but software development in general was not on that list.
interesting. But again, maybe not surprising since, like you said, it's, like maybe people are using software development, using agents or using other ways of getting at it, or maybe it was just prior to the models being as good as they are now at doing software development. Um,
Right,
yeah,
right.
really interesting. So let's go back to you. You mentioned that they sort of identified a couple of different types of tasks that AI was helping for, and then they identified some types of jobs with the highest AI applicability score. Let's talk about those a little bit.
Yeah, I actually want to pull up the list really quick because I don't have it right in front of me. I should have brought it up. But fundamentally, what they said was knowledge workers are going to be the ones that are most affected by it. And again, I don't. None of that's a surprise to any of us. I mean, that's what AI excels at, affecting knowledge workers. That's what it's. That's I think where the number one types of jobs, and that's been since day one. These are the types of jobs that are at risk or have the biggest implications from using artificial intelligence. That's been, that we've been beating on that drum for months. Then none of that's a surprise. And, traditionally more blue collar types of jobs that are more manual labor are not going to be affected by artificial intelligence. Again, not a surprise. That was the ultimate conclusion I got at the end of the day from the study.
There was one interesting wrinkle to that, but yes, and everything that honestly, I think the vast majority of what they found was probably intuitively what we were already thinking. But it's good to have some data points on it. And they found that the activities that people were doing were information gathering and writing. Like, not at all a surprise,
Right.
right? That's
No, not at all.
exactly how you and I use it all the time, especially for research and information gathering. Um, and then when they turned around to like what was the AI model providing as output, it was information assistance, writing, teaching, advising. So again, all sort of the kinds of things you would expect to find in knowledge work occupations.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and they talked about computer and mathematical occupations, designers, engineers, architects, maybe office occupations. So nothing shocking there. The one wrinkle I found was they said, interestingly, sales related occupations also had a high applicability score.
Yeah,
Um,
I saw that, and
which,
I was a little curious about that one.
yeah, but, I think, and we would have to look into more detail on exactly what the sales occupations were. I didn't go into the depths to figure out what specific roles they were talking about, but, they said it aligns to the providing and communicating information task, which, okay, that does make sense.
Right.
And especially
Okay.
as you and I know, people who are doing sort of solution selling are doing potentially a lot of pulling together information to be able to tailor a pitch to a particular client. So
Right.
I think that makes sense.
And that all makes sense. I think that's very expected. But again, I think they also made a quantum leap. But I'm looking at the list. I pulled it up, and I got they're fooling some jobs on here. I fully don't understand uh, how they would make this leap. Like, I'm sorry, switchboard operators, which I honestly, in fairness, didn't even know even existed anymore. But they're on the list, so I'm confused by some of these. Um, and I
That's
think
interesting.
again,
Yeah.
again, some of these make sense. Again, I could look at, telephone operators, and some of them seem to be fairly redundant on the list. I don't know. Let's see, tool programmers, which again makes, I think, logical sense to me. I think writers and authors, and I feel like in some cases, technical writers, which is to me, it's a subset of a writer. Like some of them were looked like they were just multiple permutations of the same role, which is sort of a lot of that on there. And it wasn't
Yeah.
broken out on more of a macro type of a level.
Okay. All right. So, limited, detail and usability, but I think it's, probably um, interesting data points nonetheless. And maybe what's most interesting about it though is, I think they didn't explicitly detail in the paper, as far as I can tell, how they determined what job each person had, right? So, if it was self-reported jobs, maybe one person clicked that they were a switchboard operator. Who knows, right? If they were inferring those jobs, could be different. But you know, regardless of all that, I think it's good that we have some empirical research on this, and I'm sure other companies will come along and add to this research, and I'm sure we'll see some findings that correlate with what the Microsoft researchers find and some that don't. But most importantly, back to where we started, what didn't they say? And they held back on making any conclusions in some pretty impactful areas, right?
Right. I think all they tried to ascertain was, again, like you said early on, is the applicability to AI to a specific job. But they never, like I said, never made any forward, at least from what I can tell in my quick read, a forward-looking projection on, the future of these jobs, if they're even going to exist in the future. It didn't make that determination um, within that study, at least that I can
Yeah.
determine.
No, I agree. I think they very much did not make any inferences or conclusions about what this meant for those jobs, about whether it meant the jobs would be
Right.
reduced or altered or changed, or whether it would require different skills. They simply did not. They simply just said AI as it existed at the time of the study had the highest applicability to certain categories, and that was it. So any
That's it.
any sort of conclusions about what this means in terms of, people who should be worried about their jobs or people who should be thinking about reskilling, that was entirely on the part of the authors who wrote follow-up stories covering this research and
I
was
got a
not
question
supported
for
by the
you.
research. Yeah.
I got a question. I got a question for you. How many of those articles were in fact written by AI?
That's a very funny question. Um,
I know.
and
I say it half in jest, but who knows? I mean, I
well,
wouldn't doubt it.
I mean, look, if not to sound mean about it, but if I'm thinking about jobs that would be impacted and in a not good for the job holder way by AI, it's all of these, pseudo journalistic jobs where people just basically restate what was in a press release, restate what was in some other, news article and throw it on their site, right? It's junk
Right.
news.
Right.
There's no original research, no original reporting. It's just rewriting or restating. That will be automated very quickly. So yes, if you're out there and
Yes.
you're one of the people who published on, I won't name names, but there were scores of journals that published fairly sensationalistic headlines around this paper. If you wrote one of those, your own job is probably at more risk than most of the people named in this study. It's just the way it
So what?
is.
No, you're absolutely correct. But I want to go off on a little bit of tangent. It's a little bit of a bugaboo of mine, and I constantly
Oh,
bring it up to people who, yeah, no,
okay.
you know me, I got to get on my soapbox for 5 minutes on some of the stuff because and I have friends, or I should say, you peruse the LinkedIn timeline on a regular basis, and I call them, or we call them, AI influencers. And I see a lot of them out there who try to break in what I view, what you view, as a very complicated, very deep. Um, Domain itself. I think AI is, and you and I from the very beginning have said repeatedly, this is not going to be easy to do it the right way. It's going to take an enormous amount of work. But I feel like there's influencers out there who love these little one-liners. Well, to me, it drives me absolutely insane because I see these articles pop up all the time, and I see these very public influencers who are really, I feel like it's the sugar high. I'm gonna listen to this person, and I mean, it's like, I did 550, AI projects in my 5 year career, and I'm like, what are you talking about? But I see a lot of that. And what I don't see a lot of is the stuff that you and I talk about, which was the real true depth of the technology and how it can really be used to radically change and transform an organization. I feel like nobody's gone there. They want the sugar high. It's like AI is easy. I can do this. I can write content, but it's all at the periphery. But talking about the real problems that can be solved, there's not a lot of that out there, at least that I see.
Yeah. Yeah, I no, I think you're right. And I think it's, maybe it's a symptom of the broader social media malaise that the world is
Mhm.
afflicted with right now, where everyone wants things in a simple bite-sized
Soundbite.
nugget, right? I
Yep.
mean, how many people will read the research paper? Very few. How many people would even read a 2,000 word article summarizing that research paper? Very few, right? People get their news from social media sites and they want
Yes.
it delivered in 30-second chunks. And so I think, look, what you and I do is not for the people who are content to have the 30-second chunks of information. It's for the people who actually care about looking deeper, right? Like I think of this, the reason I love sharing what I learn. First of all, I love learning new things. You and I learn new
Yeah.
things every week about AI. I love sharing it because I do believe there are some people out there who are curious, who want to know how this stuff works. And I don't claim to know how all of it works, but I'm having fun learning and I'm having fun sharing it.
Yeah, you and I both. That's the same. That was the thing that one of the many things that bonded us on all this initially, which was one, our passion for learning. I think we both understand just intuitively the depth of just the domain of artificial intelligence, and it's not soundbite worthy. Though I think everybody tries to chunk it into that, uh, and we look at these some of these problems or these domains where it's going to have a very deep, very broad impact. And that needs to be spoken about, I think, more broadly. I think you need to understand the real deep implications of the technology. Um,
Imagine if Einstein had been forced to um, distribute his theory of relativity and defend it on social media in 2-minute videos instead of being allowed to write and deliver research papers at
That's a good way
major
of putting it.
universities. Well, but
Yes,
that's where we are, right?
that's
I don't
exactly
think
where
that's
we
too
are.
different than where we are, right? We've got people doing
No,
world-changing research,
no, I
and
know.
yet no one wants to study it in enough detail.
No, and I
So,
think that is much to their loss. You need to understand. Look, I mean, look, this benefits us because we do study it in detail. We do appreciate the nuances. So, and I firmly believe there's going to come a day imminently when um, a lot of what we speak about is going to be much more front and center because it is important. And I think executives need to really truly understand the depth of the tech. So when we see
so
articles that pop up in the news, and if you Google just top 40 jobs, getting destroyed by AI, Microsoft, you're going to come up. It took me forever to find the article because it was so deeply buried. It
yeah,
wasn't obvious because
yeah,
it just wasn't there. Like all you heard was the headlines. That was it.
right, right. Exactly. Lots of articles about the paper, and the paper was buried and hard to find. But I'm glad you found it. I'm glad you shared it with me. It's good stuff. Let's do a podcast episode someday on how to learn in this current environment, right? How to learn about a topic using AI, how not to learn about a topic. Not that we're the Jedis of it, but we've learned a lot the last few months, and probably have some tips we could
Yes.
share on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And you and I we've developed a large class on this. So we have a lot of
Yeah.
information that we can share with everybody.
Yeah.
So
All right. So I guess let's should we move on to our other topic that we had wanted to talk about? I'm glad we
yeah.
took some time to talk about this research paper. And look, don't be scared if you read just the headlines, and maybe take this as motivation to go deeper and read beyond the headlines and read beyond the articles reporting on someone else's research, right? Like,
Right,
first
right.
going back to primary sources is always the right move. And when
Yes,
we have our podcast on how to learn, the good news is it has never been easier to go to the primary sources and understand them than it is now, right? If AI has done anything to change my life, it has made it easier for me to read original research papers, more of them in shorter time, and
absolutely.
easier to comprehend them. And you know, that's maybe a foreshadowing of things we can talk about when we do an episode on how to learn in the age of AI.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. We should definitely do that because I think we're living in an age where not using these tools to learn faster is much to your own detriment, and you should definitely uh, we should definitely do a podcast on that because I think it helped quite a few people. But let's pivot to the other topic, which I actually like a lot, and I think it's far more interesting, totally honest with you, and far more
Okay.
grounded in real problems and the whole premise of AI transparency rights. And when you proposed this topic, I had to think about it for a little bit. Which side of the fence am I going to fall on this one? Discussion about it. And I'm still not 100% sure if you want to know the truth.
Nor am I. I mean, look, this is a gray area. So the question on the table for our, I guess we'll have a spirited debate slash discussion on it, is when should you disclose the use of AI, right? And that embodies a whole bunch of things from, whether you're a student or a working professional, an artist, etc. When do you have to label or tag something as AI generated, or other whatever else you need to do to disclose that AI had some role in your process? Like, is it, and look, I mean, there's the two extremes of the argument. Let's set out the extreme spectrum. One extreme is everything should be labeled. If there's any AI in it anywhere at all, it should be labeled or clearly identified. The other is, if I am the ultimate person who submits a piece of work under my name, no one should care what tools I used. If I'm a sculptor, do you care whether I used a pneumatic powered uh,
Right.
chisel to clear away large parts, or whether I used a modern steel chisel and titanium hammer, or whether I used a bronze chisel and a wooden mallet? Right? Do you care? Should you care?
No. And
So,
it's funny
okay.
you bring up those examples, and those were the same examples that I was going to bring up. Do you really care about the person that's building something for you? Do you care about the tools that they use? And I can kind of fall down the side of generally probably. I don't think you need to necessarily know. You're right
But,
though.
but you
What?
might care when it comes to how much you're going to pay them. Because at some point, and
But
I don't, this is controversial, but like, if you're paying for someone, should you pay on the value of what was created, or do you get to have some opinion about how much of a profit margin they make on the thing they're paying for? And I say that because we came down in a very different place when we talked about the impact on consulting and legal and other professions of AI. We said that customers were going to insist on, not paying the same price if they knew that their cost of producing a deliverable was getting significantly lower because of AI. So maybe we're not 100% consistent in that.
no, yeah. You got me in that one this morning. That was not what I was thinking. You're right, though. It's inconsistency in our thought, and I really don't. And I'm trying to nuance it a little bit and come up with a counter argument to that and why we. I haven't yet come up with one. I guess again, I'm still a little bit slow this morning. Um,
Well,
but I
let's
can't.
start with like art and creativity. Let's start with that. Like, what do you think? If I use AI to create a piece of art, music, graphic art, visual art, edited photograph, if I use AI, is it less real? Let's start with, is it even real art if I used AI to do it? And then second question is, should I be required to disclose what I used?
Um, I'm going to say. It's funny, and you and I have been for a very long time avid photographers, and we have been using these tools for, in our cases, manipulation of images for decades. And I don't know if you recall, you've probably seen some of this art out there where a photographer will take thousands of images and they'll use them and arrange it into the shape of another image. And if you look, and the more you focus in on the painting itself, you can actually see the underlying images. And you do that
I
with
love those.
software.
Yep.
I do too. And the reason I'm thinking about it is one of the reasons we're here in Utah is to went to an art fair yesterday. It was one of the artists actually had them. He used keys on a keyboard instead. And it was actually kind of fascinating. It made me remember when I used to do that. I used to take my photography, and then I would take thousands of pictures, and I would take an image that I wanted
Yep.
to replicate with those
Yep.
images, and the software would actually do it for me. But it never occurred to me to say, well, I used the following piece of software to do this to everybody. It just was, I don't know, I never thought about it that way. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch. I don't know if I want to,
No.
look, this, we're still, the art's still being generated by a person. How I get the ideas to generate that art. And if I'm using generative AI or one of the image models out there, I'm still taking whatever it is it creates. Now, yeah, I can say, I'm taking something that AI created and I'm just printing it. Okay, fine. Maybe that's not art per se, but art's very subjective in the first place. And maybe just the use of AI is in and of itself interesting because I still have to tell it to do what I want it to do, and I have to be, it's not just AI is magically creating something. So
So
I don't know. What do
it's
you think?
interesting too because I have mixed feelings. Two things came to mind when you're talking about the example of those photo mosaics, which I used to love to make those as well, and they're fascinating. And the first is you could, if you had enough patience, you could do that by hand, right? You could take all
Yes.
of the source images, shrink them down to very small, and basically arrange them by tonality or dominant color or whatever, and use those as pixels to create an image, right? You could do it. Everything I've ever done with AI when I'm editing images, and it's usually very little. It's removing an object or maybe changing the sky. So I use AI masking. What's
Right.
interesting to me is those are all things I could and used to do by hand. I'm
Yes.
saving time by using AI to do them. But I always have the ability to go in and manually mask out the sky. It's just time consuming, painstaking work that I can do with a couple of clicks with AI. But so AI is a tool that saves me time, but it's not doing anything I couldn't do myself in that scenario. And,
Right.
and the other thing is that's interesting is, you were talking about like you get to the concept of pure AI generated art, right? Where someone maybe gives a prompt to an image generation engine and it creates something. I see where that is like possibly creating something that I never would have had the ability to do myself. I may never have had the imagination to take the words I used and turn them into that image. But this isn't new. there have been cases going back hundreds of years of famous painters who ran workshops where they had apprentices, and those apprentices had been trained by the painter to paint in their style, and they were painting under the direction of the master painter. But the
Yes.
brushstrokes were created by another person, and yet in many cases, those paintings were signed off by the master painter and were sold or passed off as that
Yes.
painter's work. And
Right.
even now, there is some dissent in the art history community about whether those should or shouldn't be counted as works by that master painter. So this is hardly new problems.
No, that's an awesome example, and you're right, because that has been happening and it still happens. I mean, you look at the works of, say, Warhol or Gustavi or or Herring, or any of these other artists. They have teams of people that are creating this art for them. I mean, yes, they come up with the broader concept, but like you said, they train artists to paint in their style. So now, is it less their art, or again, it's interesting. It's an academic discussion, or I don't know what the answer is. But then
So
again,
one implied principle that you hit on is the fact that there's the how much reliance is put on the AI tool or the third party versus how much work is done by the
right,
artist, right?
right.
And maybe it's a measure of work, but it could also be a measure of how much input comes from the artist, right? Like if I do a 3-word prompt to an image generation engine, I clearly have done less work than someone who is creating a picture on oil paint and then asks AI to morph it and modify it, right? So I don't know. Let's look at it maybe a different way. So what if I'm a painter and I'm painting a fantastic abstract painting, and every brushstroke was made by my hand? But what if I then told you that the image I came up with, I actually used AI to brainstorm and come up with a fantastical scene? I said, I want a scene that has, these elements in it and has this feeling. Give me 10 ideas. And I took the ones I liked and I refined them further until it gave me sort of a menu. It gave me a textual description and I had to paint it. Now, is that still my art? Or the
So,
fact that I used AI to brainstorm what I was going to put in this painting, does that make it less my art?
so I'm going to make a statement which I found. I was watching the Billy Joel biography last night on HBO. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. I grew up with Billy Joel, and as much as I love his music, always have, I was mesmerized by this man's creative output. It is mind-boggling how much he did. When you sit there, having grown up with him, it's just amazing. Anyway, my whole point is he made a statement which I actually stuck in my head last night, and it's a very succinct statement. And he goes, "None of us were born in a test tube. Everything we do is a derivative." Because he used to get criticized heavily on his works, being, well, he's just copying or he's deriving or he's basically copying somebody else, and that was a lot of his criticisms. And he's spot on. And you think about it, none of us, there's not a single artist out there that's been born in a test tube. None of us are living in a world where we're isolated in a white room and we have a complete blank slate. We see everything around us. We look at art. Artists have been trained on other work. So if you think about it, what is originality at the end of the day? It is a derivative. You're taking things, maybe you organize them somewhat uniquely, but you're still deriving your work from the work of somebody else. So what makes this
Right.
any different?
Right. I agree. It's, back to my fantastic painting. If I hadn't used AI, I would still be influenced by every article I'd ever read, everything I had seen in recent memory, every person I had spoken to, right? Like there's not an original thought in my brain in a strictly speaking sense, because we're continuously absorbing things around us. And whether you're aware of it or not, the things you absorb impact your thoughts going forward.
Your,
So,
your brain is a
yeah.
phenomenal pattern matching, pattern creating tool, and it's basing
Okay.
and it's creating patterns. But
I'm gonna say then that you would take a fairly liberal attitude towards. You would not be aggressive at requiring. If you could make these rules, you wouldn't require AI disclosures on every piece of art where AI had been
no,
a tool. Okay.
not at
What
all.
about
Same way,
let's
I would never have said I'm using Photoshop on photography. Everybody knows I was doing it. I was never going to tell them. Yeah, of course I'm doing it.
all right, so what about in a business context? should how the question becomes in a commercial sense, how do we translate that to business? How much should we be required to disclose when AI is used? And there's a few different angles here that I want to explore. One is me as an individual person working for a company or working on behalf of a company, right? If I'm using AI as a tool. And then the other is in the relationship between the company and its customers. Um, let's start with that one because we've talked about the former a few times. We haven't talked about this latter
Right.
category. So, if I'm a customer, should I expect to know? Let's say, for example, if I am using a chatbot on their web page and it helps me solve a problem I have, should I know whether that is or isn't AI? Should I have a right to be told?
Um, I'm going to take the stance I don't think you need to know. It's not affecting you. I mean, I think we all assume, let's use the chatbot example. We all assume today there's not a person behind that. We all know there's not a person behind that. So do I really need to know? Is it going to change anything in my view of the company, especially if I'm getting the answers I want, and arguably going from old chatbots to the newer ones, which are 100 times more sophisticated and better at generating output and are much more human-like? Do I really need to know as long as I'm getting what I need from it? Now, I could honestly say, if I want to talk to a human, I press the button, I should talk to a human. But I don't think you need to know. What do you think?
I,
Where do you fall
I,
on that?
I think I agree with you. I don't think you need to know. There's something you said I want to pick at a minute, which is about because it doesn't really impact you. So let's come back to that in a second. Funny thought though. You said talk to a human, right? I would say if I were designing the system, I would say, do you want to escalate it? Because here's the interesting thing. Maybe you start with a smaller, less expensive to run chatbot to handle questions, and the escalation instead of to a human might be to a better chatbot. And
That's a good
you
point.
might say, well, why wouldn't you run the best chatbot? Well, if you're a large company and you're dealing with tens or hundreds of thousands of customer interactions a day, the cost of inferencing, the cost of running that chatbot will be material. And so you should start just like you
You're
have
right.
a first line customer service desk of less experienced CSRs, and then they escalate to the priority ticket desk of more expensive, more experienced customer service reps. Why wouldn't you do the same thing with your AI models? Why not try to answer the query with the cheapest model you have, and then if you need to go to a more expensive to operate model, escalate, and then maybe your next escalation could be to an actual human supervisor, but just food
Right.
for thought. Like,
No, that's an
oh,
interesting perspective. I hadn't even thought about that.
yeah, so it doesn't have to be binary AI or person. It might be weak AI, strong AI, even stronger AI, and person. Um, and isn't it kind of funny how I assume that person is at the top of that food chain? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the
I
best
was going to
escalation would
say,
actually be to the best AI, not to a person.
yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. At the end of the day, if you think about it, and we all know this, what is it that turns us off from interfacing with a chatbot? It's the lack of humanness. Like we like to speak about it. That's why we like to speak about a human. Even though, honestly, you're right. You hit a valid point. Chances of the human giving a better answer than an AI that's been trained on a vast corpus of information about the company and the problems that have been solved. AI is even a lot more accurate. So why would I not want to converse that? But you're right. You want that. It's just that we like to talk to a human, and that humanness is what's important to us. But I think you're right. A model or a sophisticated AI model to be a lot better at responding. Thanks for the
Yeah,
question.
I think a good model will respond at least as well as a well trained human.
Right. Now, and how many well-trained humans are there when it comes to this? There's always going to be varying degrees of capability. So again, I go back to the original question. Do we even need to know? If I'm getting the answer that I want and it's human-like enough, do I really care?
Okay, and you in your and so I agree with you, but in your commentary on that, you said because it doesn't affect me. So let's talk about that. Like drill into that because it doesn't affect you. Would you What would be an example of use of AI that would affect you, and would you feel differently about knowing AI was used in that situation?
No, I think what affects me most when I deal with chatbots is I think very often their inability to um, respond intelligently. That's always bothered me. But the new ones are again are more sophisticated. What's also always, I think, bothered me is Doesn't bother me. It's just not efficient. It's much more efficient to talk to a person. Like we're better at communicating. Now, rather than typing into a chatbot, if I can communicate like you and I are communicating now, I would have no issue with it. I wouldn't care.
Right. Well, and you and I've done some very early stage experiments with being able to just speak to an AI avatar that, is trained in knowledge and speaks back to you. So that would be better. Well, okay, but let's take a different scenario. Let's pretend it's not just like resolving a customer service issue. Let's pretend there's a new product out there and you really want the early access to it, right? They're opening up a beta test list and you really want to get in, and you have to talk to a chatbot. And let's assume you can even speak to an avatar just naturally back and forth, right? But they want to interview you and decide whether you get access to this tool, right? There's no human there. It's just an AI is going to decide whether to add you to the beta test list or not. Um,
Mhm.
do you think do you think in that case you have a right to know that
Mm.
it's an AI making the decision and not a human that you're appealing to?
You're asking a good question. I don't
And I'm
have a good
afraid I picked
answer.
this one specifically because it's sort of a
No,
medium stakes decision, right? It's not as urgent as a loan approval, or it's not as impactful as a loan approval, but still, you'll be happy if you get access to this beta test and you'll be a little bit bummed if you don't, right? So it's
right,
not life
right.
or death, but it matters a little to you. Like, do you feel like you deserve to know who's making the decision?
Part of me thinks it's like, do you inherently know anyway? Or you just want a way to talk to a person. You know what I'm saying? Because I think when you're getting interviewed, look, I think at least at the stage of technology, you know you're being interviewed by a machine. You're at least aware of that. It begs the question is, do I need a way of, again, escalating to a person if I really feel like, okay, I've gone as far as I can go over here. Do I need to elevate? Well, no different than I think waiting to, I want to talk to your manager or something like that. I got to think about
Eh,
that one a little bit more. It's an interesting
yeah.
question.
And here when I think about it, like it's easy to go, oh well, at some point the decision becomes important enough. I want to know. I want to know how they're making the decision, right? And
Right.
what would knowing be? If I just say, well, AI was used, you might say, yeah, but which AI model? What was it used for? How was it trained, right? But you don't know those things about the humans you talk to, right? When
No.
you talk to a human representative of a company, or you deal with them by email, or you submit a form or an application to them, you do not know the education level of that person. You do not know how many years they've had on the job. You do not know what kind of training they were given. More importantly, you do not know what constraints or what process they are using to make a decision, and most companies will never share that with you. A company is not going to say, we are going to give you a yes if you say yes to any of questions 5, 7, 11, or 13, right? Because people will game the system, and that may be their proprietary knowledge about how they run their business.
Right.
So,
Right.
like, there's a part of me that says, okay, you could know that AI is being used, but you're maybe people are laboring under the false idea that they actually know what a human is doing, right? Like having an AI as a black box makes people nervous sometimes,
Yes.
but a human-centered process is just as much of a black box. And maybe we just think, yeah,
100%.
but I'm different. I'm special. If I could talk to a human, I could convince them. And I think honestly, that's a very egocentric view that I think I and a lot of other people have is if I could just talk
Yeah,
to
it
a
is.
person, I would show them how my case is different, how I'm special, how my needs
Yes.
are special, my situation is different, and they're going to give me an exception.
And I think you're absolutely correct. That's exactly you're
I
absolutely right.
mean,
That's exactly it. I think you're spot on. So so I guess we're both kind of trending to you don't really need to know. And I want to take another swipe at this too. If like when you apply for a credit card or any kind of financial product for the most part, there is no human there making a decision for you today. That is all fully automated using a model. And if you think otherwise, you're crazy. There's not a bunch of people sitting in a room someplace looking at your credit history, making a decision if Peter or David get a credit card. That's not the case. It is
right.
automated
Unless
100%.
you're applying for a massive syndicated commercial loan, there's probably no
Right,
humans really looking at your case file for most
right.
cases. Yeah.
And I think that's true for much of what happens today. Many decisions are fully automated, driven by models that are, very sophisticated, traditional, statistical analysis models out there. And a lot of what you do is done that way, whether you realize it or not. That's the way it's done. So why is AI? If any AI provides any difference, it's going to make it more human. I think in some respects, especially for interfacing with a tool that seems more human.
I think the idea of bias is always there. And I think what makes people nervous is that an AI model could have a bias that goes undetected, where a human might say, wait, this isn't right. An AI model might just, you know, act upon its training. And so people are scared of the bias in AI models. And look, it's a legitimate concern. We need to continue to be very, very disciplined about training models and eliminating bias. But what you said is actually the flip side, which I think is a really interesting point. Once I create a model that doesn't have a certain bias, I know that model doesn't have the bias, and it's probably easier to prevent that than it is with humans, because human bias can be very subtle and difficult to detect. Look, we won't get into all the studies that have been done, like around hiring, where when they take away people's names off resumes, they get dramatically different results because human resume reviewers aren't able to expose their maybe sometimes latent unconscious bias based on gender or ethnicity assumptions they make about names, etc. So, like AI, to your point, AI can reduce bias. There are concerns about bias created by AI models, but it can also be used in a way that is less biased than humans.
And I think that's a very valid point. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
go
So
ahead.
you'd be comfortable. The other one that gets a lot of press right now is hiring decisions, right? Like I hear all the time from people who are frustrated because they know that when they submit a resume, screening might be done by machine. Sometimes it's just done by keyword searches and other deterministic methods. Other times it's done by AI, but there's screening by AI. People do AI interviews. This has been done in the financial service industry for a
I
long
know.
time, where people have
Yes.
video interviews, and the AI models analyze the video interactions and make inferences about your openness to new ideas, about your receptiveness to authority, about all of these judgment calls that affect whether you're going to get offered a job. How do you feel about that?
Oh, you know me. I hate those tools. I actually don't like them.
Oh,
And I know it's
they're
funny.
miserable, dehumanizing to have to do. I'm sure. I'm like you. I'm old enough that I've never actually had to use any of
Ditto.
those applying for a job, but it
Right.
doesn't sound fun.
No,
But then the
it
other
doesn't.
side of me says, how could they be any more biased than some of the terrible hiring managers I'm sure you've found and I've run across in my life, right? Like there are
No,
there
you're
are people who are terrible at interviewing. There are people who are just jerks and they're biased and they're right and they don't like your loud shirt one day, and nothing you say is going to change their opinion. So I keep coming
right.
back to it's different, but is it any worse than humans? Because humans are pretty terrible people sometimes.
Um, no, you're right. In fact, it might actually be better. At the end of the day,
Right.
you think about it, it actually might be better. I it's funny because again, this is one of these areas which I'm always, I hate to say some of these things, I'm consistently inconsistent because I fall on different sides of the fence depending on the problem, which I readily admit, because I think it's hard to be fully consistent with some of this. But no, I would never want to be right now trained by any kind of AI tools. I never have been, and I've always advocated to not use them. I've found that I've always had issues with them, but that's today's version of them. Fast forward a year or 2 or 3 years when they've gotten incredibly sophisticated, and for all I know, I'm speaking to an avatar that is incredibly human-like, and responds to me in a way that is I would expect a human to respond to me. Well, I even know the difference. Again, I'm not
Right.
even. I have it just let's stay on the interviewing process in general. I have a general problem with two-dimensional interviewing, and by that I mean there is much that humans are very visual, and there's a lot that you lose. And we saw this during COVID when some of us got jobs and we never met our coworkers other than on Zoom. There's a lot of information that's lost when you don't see somebody physically. And yet that there's biases to that, of course. But there's a lot that's lost. And that bothers me. That's not something that can be easily captured on a screen. You're not going to be able to see how I look when I walk in a room, how I carry myself, gait, my this, my that, my clothes. There's so much that you don't see. And that's some of my issues with it. Like when I walk into a room and I interview with somebody, it's a two-way process. I'm interviewing the person that's interviewing me as much as they're interviewing me, and I can assess much more of them. I walk into their office. Is it their desk covered with stuff? Well, that tells me how they think. There's a lot of subtle information that you'll lose when you're not. And that's my problem with some of the tools, more than I think that they're AI or not AI. Or that's what really bothers me.
So, all right. So I think we both sort of land on, the answer to should you have to disclose the use of AI is it depends, right? And it depends in a creative realm and it depends in a business realm. Like, depends on what? So you just gave a good example where I think if I paraphrase what you said correctly, there are some things where the decision is more fact based than not. And so an AI model is going to make a good decision there. And that might be everything from a credit card approval to, how to route you to the right resource to solve your problem on the help desk. There's other problem sets that are much more nuanced and much less easily prescribed. And therefore, you can't really train AI on them as effectively, like human interactions and hiring decisions. And, honestly, it'd be the same with dating, I imagine, right? Because like hiring and dating are both
Very
interpersonal
similar,
experiences, right? There's
right?
so much about personality that goes into it. So I think, where you land on that is, hey, there's a aspect of what the decision to be made is that some things lend themselves to AI and some things still, at least with our current technology, do not. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
that's fair. I think that's fair. I'll caveat it a bit, but are there places where AI can augment the process significantly? Like clearly, let's use the interview process for, or even a dating process for argument's sake. There's a lot of information that maybe you can capture up front. Maybe, and again, the first interview. It's just an analysis of you as an individual. You're still going to go through the process of meeting a human. But there are certainly subtleties in my facial expressions and how I hold myself that maybe it just completes or gives a deeper dossier. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
so you're going to give it to the hiring manager's going, well, we know this about Peter. This is his full detailed dossier of Peter based on our psychological analysis, based on him speaking to the camera and his facial expressions. And we used, facts, which is a facial analysis study. There's things I don't know. Maybe that's it. I don't know what the answer is here. I think it's
Yeah.
rapidly changing so fast.
I like what you said, though. I like the idea that, it's not an either or. It's a how do you introduce AI in the right dosage and the right role into different types
Right.
of interactions or
Right.
decisions, etc. Right. And so AI as one source of input to human making a hiring decision sounds a lot better to me than AI being the screening mechanism that determines whether I ever get to see a human. Um, okay, so what about the idea that, it's okay if there's like, I've seen people talk about like, well, it depends how much AI is used, right? But
How
then
do
you
you
get
define
these
that, though?
messy, right? Right. How do you measure how much? Is it how much of the time? Is it how many interactions the person has with AI to get the answer? Like, it's very amorphous.
Yeah, no, it's very amorphous. I don't know how to define that. Like, I don't know how you would even define it. Then you get some, I don't know, some crazy system that has a whole bunch of caveats that is nonsensical. I don't know. I think you have to take case by case by case, and I don't know if there are going to be some of it. I just want to say, use common sense about. I think, look, let's go back to the interview process. A good one. You're going to tell the potential hire, we are going to interview online first. We are going to do some analysis, some facial analysis of you, just so you know. It is not the determining factor. It is just to give us more information because we feel that it's going to help us make better hiring decisions. It is not the determining factor, though. That's great. I need to know that information. I would like to know that information. Um, but, you're being transparent about it. But there are cases where I don't necessarily want to know, don't need to know. I don't care. I don't know. And I don't think most people care because I think most people just want to get what they want to get. And they're less, and the faster they get it, the more accurate they get it. They're happy. They don't necessarily need to talk to a person. They don't need to know if it's AI or not.
Yeah. And the example you just gave about hiring, where you said we use AI tools in these ways to help make a hiring decision, but it's a human making the decision. I think also that whole aspect of to what degree is there a human in the loop? That in my opinion, changes things dramatically because
Yes.
I become a lot less sensitive to how much AI there is if I know that there's also a strong
Right.
human in the loop component, right? And again, ignoring this for a minute, the fact that we have this idea that humans are better, and yet we have no idea how they were trained, what problems they woke up thinking about this morning that might cloud their judgment, right? All of these things.
Right. Right.
Okay. So, and at the end of the day, it comes back to, I keep coming back to two things. One is, if you have a human in the loop, does it matter whether or not AI was used? At the end of the day, if you have a human who is taking accountability for a decision, for example, who is signing off on a work product, that human is saying, I agree with what's written here. If they actually read it, analyze it, understand it, and agree with it, or change it so that they do agree with it, does it matter what AI was used in the background? Especially if they change something. If the AI says, here's 10 things you should do, and they say, I don't agree with these two, and they turn it into a list of 8 things you should do, does it matter? Because some of AI's impact was already discarded, and the rest was validated by a human.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't think so.
By the way, to your earlier point, even if that person didn't use an AI, they may have done some research, they may have done some reading, and they may have unknowingly read articles that were generated by AI or that were created by humans assisted by AI. So it goes back to like what you said in the beginning is there's no way anyone could actually say with confidence there was no AI involved in the conclusion I reached. Just because I didn't use AI doesn't mean it wasn't in the chain of ideas that led to my conclusion.
You have no way of knowing. So I'm going to make a bit of a prediction over here. And a lot of these discussions were happening. Look, I think a lot of these discussions are out there because there's been such one, we all know it's a very transformative technology and it's evolving rapidly. So people are asking all these philosophical questions about it. Fast forward about a year or two from now, or maybe even, again, I'm not going to try to predict the future. Soon, let's say AI gets to a point where it's rapidly coming, where it's such a sophisticated tool and it's adding so much value to our lives that we're not going to even be asking these questions anymore because we just don't care. As long as we're getting what we want as fast as we want, 99.99% of the time, I don't think most people are actually going to care.
I agree with you. I gamed this out in my own head and I said, okay, let's say that we actually say, hold ourselves to a standard of we should disclose the use of AI everywhere it's used, right? Well, I got to a similar point by a different route, which was pretty much every single email I read, every article I read, every piece of media I consume would have an AI generated label on it. And when it gets to the point where everything has an AI generated label, that label becomes meaningless because that label can no longer be used by me to discern between what I think is reliable, unreliable, or human or non-human or whatever
100%.
Whatever discernment I want to make. It's useless. Everything is AI generated. So does it matter if I have a label on it?
No, doesn't make a darn bit of difference. And I agree with you. That's actually the right way to say it, yes, because you're right. And I think we're rapidly approaching that where so much is just generated by artificial intelligence that discerning the difference is impossible. Like even look, Netflix now is, they're building a massive new studio, which I'm happy they're doing it because it's relatively close to where I live and it'll generate a lot of jobs. But even they are using AI to do a lot of their work quite extensively in a lot of the shows now. And you just, okay, do I care? No, I think it's neat. I think it's cool. I'm fascinated that it's so powerful. But do I care? I'm still being, I just don't care. What are they going to put a big, a thing at the beginning of like an R rating like this movie was generated by artificial intelligence. I don't care.
So I think what we're going to come up with is here's my prediction for the future. And I might be wrong. We'll see what happens. I think my prediction is we will see a very limited number of use cases where people agree that authenticity stamps matter. So we won't certify AI generated. We will certify some things that are authentic. And you and I just spent, a long time talking about how hard it is to define authentic. So like it's in the eye of the beholder. And therefore, the next leap of logic in that for me is authentic is not a binary thing, right? What's authentic, what's not, I don't know anymore. The way we will assert authenticity is by provenance or lineage. In other words, we will have a way of proving what happened to, in this case, I go back to photography. So you and I have talked about
Right.
before the Content Authenticity Initiative, the CAI, is an open source standard that the New York Times and Adobe and Leica Camera and others have joined in on. And basically, I can, if I use the right set of tools and I only make certain allowed changes like exposure compensation and cropping, I can have a image that has an electronic watermark that says I've only made those changes to it and it's authentic. So I think we'll get to where there's authenticity labels, but they're never going to be black and white. It's going to be, it's authentic within this definition of what constitutes authenticity.
So you said something interesting, unintentionally, cropping. Now, you know as well as I do, cropping a photo can have a dramatic impact on how you view
Huge.
that image. Huge. And there's been many, many examples out there of individuals with cropped photos and radically changed the meaning of the photo. If you had seen the full frame, you would have been, that's very different than they tried to, the point they are intentionally trying. I don't know. Even with a tool that's guaranteeing authenticity of that, we have I always go back to, I hate to use the word misinformation or this or that, or, you have to be a critical thinker at the end of the day. You have to look at everything with some kind of critical thought and ask yourself fundamental questions. Does that seem logical? Does that seem rational? Does that make any real sense? Is there something here I should be questioning? And AI to me doesn't, it's just another way of manipulating reality, which we've been doing for thousands of years. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe
Yeah.
I
No,
look at some of
I
this,
agree.
you
You
know,
nailed it. Like a guarantee of authenticity or the absence of an AI disclosure or whatever. Those are crutches, right?
yes.
It's sort of a cheat. At the end of the day, look, this is a standard that we will never, any of us ever live up to entirely. But everybody who consumes any input, an image, right? An article, a movie, a book, whatever it is, we are ultimately accountable for assessing its source, its provenance, and determining how we want to interpret it, right? If I read an article in some newspapers, I will know that those newspapers have a particular bias or slant.
Same,
And if I don't
same.
know that, I should, right? Like if I really were holding myself to the standard, I would do some research to understand that outlet, their editorial policies, that journalist, what that journalist was shaped by, etc. Um, that's a tall
Right.
order, but at the end of the
No, it
day,
is. But
that's really the only way.
when I learned this at a young age, I'll never forget. Like when I took current events in fifth grade or sixth grade, whatever it was, and and I feel like you and I talk about educational. I know we're off the beaten path on this conversation a little bit, but we're still human. We still need to use our brains. And it's important to ask yourself the question, does that seem logical or real? Let's go back to the conversation we had earlier when we were talking about the Microsoft, and you look at all the headlines out there. And the first question you have to ask yourself is this legitimate? Is this real? Or is there something more to the story, which you and I delved into? Clearly, there's a lot more to the story. And the outcome, or what they were saying, what the authors were saying, was very different than what all the magazines were saying.
Everything comes full circle. Look, I
Always
guess,
does.
we didn't reach a definitive conclusion about AI disclosures, and I think that is the conclusion, right? The fact that there is no conclusion is the answer. There is just there's no way for anyone to say without being careless and silly. There's no way for anyone to make some blanket assertion that disclosures are needed or disclosures are not needed, right? You would be ignoring way too much nuance and way too much reality to say that. It's more complicated than that. I do think you and I both agree that, you know, it will be a moot point soon because the assumption will be AI is used
Yes.
in every
Everywhere.
place.
Right.
And
Everywhere.
that disclosure doesn't remove the need for humans to exercise judgment.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. And I say this to, my kids all the time. Use your brain. You got to use the brain. and you can't accept what you always see because more often than not, it's not what you think. And this is where you have to think. And I think I hold that most humans, we want things to just, I don't know, we want risk-free world. We want things to be what they look. We know as well. There's a massive gray area between everything, and you have to just use your brain. And AI doesn't change that. You still have to use your brain.
That's actually the note to end on. I think you just said it very well. AI doesn't eliminate the need to use your brain. It's a tool to get you better information, more information, but at the end of the day,
Right.
you can't outsource your decision making or your thinking to AI. It's a tool to gather data to help compose your thoughts, but you got to use your brain.
Still got to use your brain. That little piece of gray between your ears, you got to use it. It's there for a reason other than keeping you breathing. So use it.
Peter, good discussion. This was a good topic to tackle. And
yes.
I think, look, these things are relevant because I think there is still anxiety, fear, confusion, and a lot of other emotions out there around AI. And I think it's really important to have a balanced look at how you use it, how you don't use it, how you disclose it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, hence my problem with the influences.
All right.
And
well,
I'll stop on that.
Till next time, when we have another thrilling discussion about the world of AI. Peter, thank you for being with me, co-hosting Call Me Data, and we'll see you soon.
Always a pleasure, David. Listen, you have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us over on YouTube. And make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well.